Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of How to Paint. Today we're painting up the Range Troopers from Star Wars Legion. This was a fairly recent expansion that just came out, so without further ado, let's get into it. So, the Range Troopers. These guys appeared in the Solo Star Wars movie, and they were only in there for like a blink, but they were really cool when they're on screen. They've got these gigantic magnetic boots, which is a really cool feature. So I'm going to start off by just assembling these. There's only one way they can be assembled. So this is my usual thing of just cutting them out and then using an X-Acto just to clean up the sculpt. And then I'm using some plastic glue to assemble the models. And because these are hard plastic, I like to use plastic glue for the actual model itself. And then I use a super glue to glue the figure onto the base, in case I just change my mind on the bases. So I'm going to do something a little special for a couple of these guys. I've got some leftover premium bases from a very early release, and then just picking a couple of these guys to stick onto these bases instead. As I said, these guys in the movies had magnetic boots, and I want to represent that. And then I've got some leftover debris and things from like old 40k models, so I'm going to snip a few things up here and then glue these on to the plain bases. For priming, I'm just doing straight white all over, and you can also do this with a spray can. And once the prime's dry, I'm starting off with Gravelord Grey and Speedpaint Medium. This is a 1-to-1 mix, and that really thins it right the way down, so it ends up becoming more of a light wash rather than a contrast paint. And I'm just going to start to apply this on all of the armor pieces. Starting off with those iconic boots, and just letting it sink into those recesses there. I don't mind if it turns the armor slightly grey, and then what I'll do is I'll take a damp brush and just wipe away some of that excess. The desired effect here is just a very, very light shading all over the armor. Next I'm using Pallid Bone, and that's same Speedpaint Medium. It's a 1-to-1 mix again, and I'm using this for the overcoat and all the fur and everything. I'm not too worried about how dark this is. I'm going to build up to a bright white. And the secret to painting white is to not paint white at all. So what I mean by that is that you start off really dark and you build your way up to your brightest highlight, which will be a white. And I'm starting off with the jacket, so we're going to be using a deck tan. And what I'm doing here is I'm just applying this. I'm using the contrast paint as kind of a roadmap to show me where those highlights would naturally fall. And then if there's those areas of shade that are a little bit too heavy, I'm just going over that with one coat of this deck tan. So it's not completely shaded in, but it's at least a little bit brighter than what it was. I'm just working my way around the model and making sure I get the sleeves. And I'm just taking my time, just loosely throwing in some highlights where I think they need them. Next I'm switching to a dark wood paint. And this is watered down with that Speedpaint Medium again, and I'm just applying this to the bottom of the fur. The idea here is that I want to show like a delineation between the fur and the jacket. And then I'm going back in with that original deck tan and just loosely highlighting some of those strands. I'm looking to basically feather the edge between the dark wood and the original deck tan color. And now I'm going to start introducing some white, and my preferred white is this bold titanium white by Acryl. And what I've done is I've actually mixed this in with some of the deck tan, so it's not a pure white. And then rather than do like a paint stroke, what I'm doing is I'm kind of scratching in those highlights, and this helps add texture to that jacket. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it ends up making it look much more natural. And then lastly, what I'm doing here is just using some pure white and highlighting a couple of these strands. What I'm hoping to do is get an overall higher contrast on the top of the model and on the feet of the model. And so what that means is I have to limit myself to using pure white mostly on the top and the bottom of the miniature. And I could have mixed up a light grey, but because I wanted it to be consistent, I'm using ash grey. And this is just to help me fill in some of those areas that may be a little bit too dark from that initial contrast paint that we applied. So I'm applying this as kind of the basis of my first highlight, and I'm using it in sort of these larger areas on the helmet and these pouches and things. White can be a really tricky paint to use, so what I'm doing instead is I'm building up to that white. And then even when I do use it, I'm limiting myself to just the purest highlights. And because there's a lot of detail on these boots and I don't really want to spend too much time on them, I'm just using a pure white and I'm just dragging the brush over the sculpt, letting it catch wherever it does. And then lastly, this is the pure white again, but I'm just making sure that I apply some patches onto some of these bigger, flatter areas on the helmet. And to help some of that gradient, sometimes dampening the brush or lowering the consistency of the paint down to like a milk consistency will help actually feather that edge. And now I'm using a Runic grey speed paint. This is a very thin speed paint, so I don't have to water this down any. And because I've got a nice yellowy white on the coat, I figured I'd like a nice contrasting white on the armor. And so this is helping to add just a little bit more blue into that white that I've already painted on the armor. And if I focus it entirely on like the chest and these pouches and the belt and things, what it does is it helps darken the middle of the miniature. And then I'm also adding this onto the boots just to help blend in some of those drastic highlights. For some of the details, I'm going to be using Evil Sunz Scarlet. And this is a nice bright red paint that you can use for like the LEDs and things on their chest. And for the bases, I'm going to be starting off with some grey earth. This is the coarse, but you can also get it in fine as well, depending on your preference. And I'm just spreading this on. I'm not too worried about like complete coverage on the base, but I also want some of those metallic debris and things like that to stick through. So really the only thing I'm worried about is just not getting it on the painted miniature so far. And to keep consistency throughout each of my bases, on the guys that are on the metal bases, I'm just adding a couple of dabs of this to help sell the idea of a natural and metallic environment. And then I'm going to be using some coal black here and a small little sponge, and I'm dabbing on some chips and damage. I like to limit this just to the armor, but with the sponge you can be quite precise. And this is a Grim Black speed paint. I'm using this on the heavy weapon troopers. There's two of these guys. And then I'm using a very, very small amount to get that little tab that's on the front of their helmets. If there's any overspill, what I'll do is I'll go back in with the original white and just run the edge of the brush along the sculpt. There's a few more LEDs on the costume, so this is Baharroth blue, and just very, very carefully applying some of these. It is a very light blue, so it's not going to show up too well, but against like the white and the greys, it looks pretty good. And in the movie, whenever their boots detach, they have a blue LED on the back, and whenever they connect, they have a red LED. So I'm recreating that here. I'm just adding a few more details on the gun with the Gravelord Grey. And here I'm using Victorian brass. This is a metallic paint. And I'm using a brush with a very, very fine tip and running it along the edge of that visor. Again, if there's any overspill, I'll just go back in with that original ash grey or that white and just tidy up that edge. This is a Cloudburst blue speed paint, and I'm using this for any of the areas of metallic. I'm also applying a few dabs on the earth texture that we've painted on now that that's dry. This is a great kind of blue-grey for cold metallics. And then here what I've done is mixed in some white with that Cloudburst blue and made a very, very light blue, and I'm just dry brushing that on to help sell the damaged effect on the metal. So I found this stuff years ago at a hobby store, but you can use a white texture paint as well. I think Vallejo does a snow, and like AK does a snow as well. And this is a very, very bright white. And again, I'm selling the idea of bright contrast at the base of the model and bright contrast at the top of the head of the model as well. And then lastly, I just wanted to add a small pop of color on the whole model. So this is some tiny green tufts, and just adding these into some random areas on the base and some of the cracks between the metal as well. And then my traditional thing of finishing out the models with a black rim. And there you have it, 7 range troopers ready for Star Wars Legion. These guys are so cool. I love them in the movie for the small screen time that they get. I'm really not a fan of like painting just pure white on models because it can look kind of icky. So being able to add in some colors, some cool white, some warm white, really helps break up the monotony of the color scheme. The other thing that was really awesome with these troopers was the contrast. I'm not really good at like getting contrast and drawing the eye where I want people to see. So by playing with those brightness levels really helped like draw focus to the top and the bottom of the models. As always, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're new to the channel, I do painting videos every week, so please consider subscribing and dropping a like on the video as well. Also helps me out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.